Well, hello there. Welcome to the first and last live stream I'm ever going to do for this class. Nobody asks any questions about the readings, but boy howdy, do you guys ask questions about attendance. I don't care about attendance. I care about argumentation. Welcome. Hope you guys are doing well. We're just going to talk about some readings and stuff, I think. I don't really have much of a plan other than that. I think, let's bring the music down a bit. Oh, hey, look at that. Welcome. Hello viewers. You can chat in YouTube or you can chat in lovely Discord. If you're a member of the course, you can chat in Discord. I'm hoping that this thing is going to function properly. I've had nothing but internet problems today, so if it cuts out, that might be it. But for the next 2 hours, talk about argumentation, reasoning, and rhetoric here on the stream. Welcome, Vincent Van Gogh. Thank you for taking a break from your painting to join us here on the stream. Appreciate it. I wonder what people are going to want to talk about. I wasn't really sure where to start with the stream here. I am going to go to the Discord and see if there's anybody who wants to talk. We have a number of people in Discord. I wonder if I can create, I think I can create a little thing where we can see the Discord. Whoa, hey, whoa, what happened? Where'd I go? Where am I? Ah! Well, that's not going to work. That was terrible. Maybe I should prepare a little bit better for the next time we do this, if there is a next time that we do this. Anyway, any questions you guys have about readings and stuff, I might just proceed directly into some of the stuff here. Oh, look. Oh, I can put the Discord up here. Look at that. How cool is that? Yep, there's Discord. Oh, no, wait. Discord's not there. I thought for sure. There it is. All right. There we go. The class Discord. Here in Classroom, I guess you can talk, or if you want to come in and talk on the audio, I'll drag you into the audio channel. We'll put that on the air. It should not be a big problem. But anyway, things are kind of quiet in the Discord at the moment. Maybe people will chat there at some future point. But anyway, the YouTube chat is also open. All right, so let's go over some of these readings, huh? I'm pretty sure I'm gonna have to mute this. Oh, it's that window that's the active window, huh? Don't want that. See, I thought I had this thing all set up and ready to go, but I just do not have it. Well, this is not going very well, is it? Well, that's pretty good. This is not working for some reason. I don't know why it's not working. Alright, well, I guess what we'll have to do is just attach this to the other window here. Since this is what it wants to show. Kind of weird. Alright, well... thought I might go over the Tyndale book first and just kind of see. Ah, look at that. Okay, well, that didn't work. Man. Yeah, this was a bad idea, wasn't it? I knew it'd be a bad idea. Did it anyway. I should listen to myself. Okay, good. So, we're looking at chapters 3 and 4, yeah? Okay, it's still not showing up here on the... Why is it not showing up? There it goes. Okay, so we're looking at chapters 3 and 4 of Rhetorical Argumentation. Now I've lost the chat window again. I'll just put it in this one here. Because I want to see if people are chatting. Yeah, this is not working properly. Okay, hello Ryan. Finally I can see what's going on in here. Good lord. This is definitely not worth the amount of effort. I'd rather just make videos, I think. But if you guys have something that you want, Ryan's here, other people are here. If you have something you want to talk about or you want me to cover in detail, we can do that. I just need to know what that is. And yeah, that's it, really. And once you let me know what that is, I will cover it. It'll be great. All right. Maybe we can go over some of this. So the reason that I assigned this work, the Tyndale book. Hey, Caitlin, what's going on? The reason I signed the Tyndale book is because he's doing exactly what I think we ought to be doing when we are thinking about argumentation. What he's doing is he's trying to come up with some kind of a workable and defensible understanding of argumentation where it helps us do it better, or at least understand what we're doing if you can't make any kind of change in the doing of the thing. I think he probably wouldn't agree with that. He'd probably say, well, we can teach this and we can learn how to do it and we can improve our ability in doing it. I think he would definitely say that. And I think that that is connected to the way we understand it. And if we understand it as something very, very firm or very, very fluid. And argumentation for me has always been something that I'm always been very mystified by it. I've always been very confused by it. And one of the things that really confused me the most about it is how people move in and out of it. So you might have had this happen to you where you are arguing with somebody and they say, no, you're being way too aggressive. We're just having a discussion. What are you going on and on about? This is just a discussion. So, oh, good. There's people in Discord now. Thank goodness. I thought I was going to be here all by myself. I'm glad you guys decided to come. And this is kind of a chilled out place, so I kind of want it to be kind of a free-flowing conversation between the YouTube chat. You know, Vincent Van Gogh is in the YouTube chat, by the way, in case you guys didn't notice that. I have a feeling that he is about to give me an earful. Too soon? I don't know. I've been to the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam. It's quite nice. Been there many times, actually. What questions do you guys have? Please be sure to ask me anything. This is kind of like an AMA for my class. Yes, I'm omnipresent. Very good. This is great. It's my very first live stream, and I have a famous artist, probably the most famous impressionist artist in the chat. It's very good. Make sure you lend Vincent an ear if he asks. Let's see. So yeah, argumentation is weird because people kind of move back and forth. Maybe I can talk a little bit about your papers too. I mean, I liked. Can I stream into here? Oh, that'd be cool. Let's see. Well, I don't think it's gonna let me do that. Well, you can kind of hear, but I don't know if you can see anything. But anyway, you can jump into an audio room, and I'll put you onto the. I'll put you into the thing. It could be good. All right, so the Tyndale book is an attempt to define argumentation in a way that's never been defined before. And that's something that I would hope that you guys might try to do in the course of the class, is offer an understanding of argument that hasn't been done before. In order to do that, you kind of have to look at the way people have thought about argument before, because you kind of want to see what's out there. It's like if you wanted to impress people with a new song, you would need to know what was out there before. If you think about hip-hop music, all good hip-hop music, everything good about hip-hop comes from you understanding the history of hip-hop through listening to a bunch of it. So people will riff off of or bank shot off of or make moves off of what's already out there and what's been popular. It's the same thing when you're dealing with scholarship. Anytime a professor or a scholar writes something, they are assuming that you have some familiarity with what's out there. before on what's been said about that topic, and they're going to try to put out their own speech about it or their own writing about it in the same way that a hip hop song would sample, or the same way it would assume that you know these old lines and play with them in a way to create something new. And that's also the kind of the history of rhetorical invention in a way, is that you really can't make a new speech and you really can't make a new argument. All you can really do is make arguments that people recognize as new by virtue of the fact that they have status, or they're based on arguments you've heard before, or the notion of arguments that you've heard before. So for example, if you took a legal argumentation course from me, which I might teach in the future, assuming I keep this job and all that, which today, if you ask me today, there's about a 30% chance. Yesterday, about a 90% chance. So it really just depends on my mood every day. The idea of the law as being argumentative, and I know some of you want to go to law school, is based on the fact that control is really needed. So you need incredible control about evidence, incredible control about what lawyers are allowed to say in a courtroom, incredible control about what is able to be presented and what's not. These kind of things are incredibly important to that. Critiques of the law and its structure are based on the fact that you know this, that you know that law is the most restrictive argumentation environment you can encounter. Probably the most restrictive would be any kind of legal. You spend most of your time in law school learning how to speak and write. It's like its own language. It's like if you wanted to be a physicist or an astronomer, you would spend most of your time learning a new language. Same thing. So critiques of that are based on that, and then they go to extreme positions that you wouldn't recognize as extreme unless you're familiar with that. So critical legal studies, for example, and trashing the law, where they just offer stories and poems and things as legal analysis because they think it should be accessible to everyday people. Might be a good example of that. So Tyndale's not going that extreme. What Tyndale wants to do is start an analysis of argumentation from the strangest point of view that he can imagine. And that strange point of view is the audience, the rhetorical part, the part that other thinkers have not considered, the part that they consider last. And in chapters 1 and 2, he talked about that quite a bit. I might have to shrink myself here so you can see all the text. Oops, not what I wanted to do. Oh, geez, come on. It's like if you play video games and you know, like, you have to make a pixel perfect move. That's the way this video program is. Like, every move has to be pixel perfect, or you are so screwed. It'll mess up your whole system. Okay, I think that works. Yeah, we can see it pretty nicely there. Okay, so in the last chapter, can argument be rhetorical? And the answer to that was yes. And if you remember in chapter 2, the reasons for that were multiple. There were lots of different reasons for that. Now he's going to move towards rhetoric and say, can rhetoric be an argument? And when he's talking about rhetoric, he's talking about typical kind of things you would think about rhetoric, like sounding pretty, making clever rhyming remarks, sing-songy discourse, things like that. So when Tyndale looks to rhetoric, he's going to look to rhetoric in its most basic form, which is, oh, hey, rhetoric prof, what's up? It is indeed a glitch, and this is actually a glitch-free run of Christopher Tyndale's rhetorical argumentation. This is the 100% run, actually. I don't know what the world record speed on this is, but I'm not really close. I doubt there is a category for like reading library texts on a stream, but anyway, here we go. So this first part is about Feinstock's work about how figures play a role in certain kinds of argumentative discussion. And the first part of this is kind of something you might have already kind of noticed already, which is that rhetorical figures don't just make the words sound pretty, they actually do make certain kinds of arguments. And I'll make a more detailed video on this, because I think I'm much better at just making the videos rather than doing the live stream. But these kind of figures, like here's one here, the Rhetoricio. I think I'm saying that right, but Rhetoric Prof will correct me if he can, if he doesn't mind. These kind of figures are not just there to make the discourse sound good or work good, or they're not just grease for the engine. They're actually kind of the engine in a way. And in being kind of the engine, they actually do what we imagine argument to do, which is have palpable effect on the mind and the heart and the feelings of the people involved in the audience. So you might hear a figure like this, and this is a great figure where you say, I don't really need to mention all of the crimes that my opponent has committed. I think they're well known. I don't need to mention all the great military honors that my client has achieved in his or her lifetime, this kind of thing. Yeah, you don't really need to hear any of that, because you already know. And yeah, Praeteritio. Oh, very cool. Yeah, it sounds okay. I mean, Rhetoric Prof is the guy who knows the Latin, which is pretty good. All these figures. There's a great book of figures. I thought I'd lost mine, and I just found it today, which is the Handbook of Rhetorical Figures, which is an amazing book to have on the old shelf, especially if you're trying to communicate to your friends and family that you're a huge loser. It's a great book to have on your shelf. Full of just rhetorical figures that you can look up and talk about with yourself, because you'll have no friends. But you know, I have too many friends. That's why I have a bunch of rhetoric books. So he talks about that, and then he says, even in argumentation itself, they take the common tack of using an anti-metaboly, which is a reversal of a figure. Anti-metaboly is a very popular figure where you take, it's like X, Y, Y, X. It has this kind of beautiful symmetry to it, where you take a phrase and you say, this is this, and this is this. So it's like sing-songy kind of commercials, if you think about that. That kind of has anti-metaboly kind of stuff. I remember being at a talk once where a guy used the example of anti-metaboly from the Simpsons. Or Homer Simpson had the snowplow. I don't know if you guys watch The Simpsons. Is that too old for you guys? Yeah, right. I think Ryan's example is a good one. He compares humans to wolves in this argument 3, and this analogy is a rhetorical figure that is actually an argument. Yeah, I think that's exactly what Tyndale's trying to point out here, which is that the figure of analogy actually isn't just an ornament, or isn't just something that we add to argument that is firm or extant or something else. It's something that is created through the speech itself. That there's really, to separate these things out is not productive. And I think that's what he's trying to argue. And I think that's a good eye there in the Lanier book. Have you guys been reading the Lanier book? Maybe we should have a discussion on that in Discord sometime. I think that would be pretty fun. That book is really a lot better than it should be. Like, I read it and I thought, man, this would be a great book if I taught an argumentation class again. Pretty good stuff. So reversal of pairs is the way they argue. They talk about anti-metaboly, and I think that's what Tyndale's saying, and it's more than just mere style. And I want you to think about this idea of mere style. Like, for a long time, rhetoric was always thought of as something extra, or something that was just kind of additional to the heart of an argument, or the heart of a claim, or the heart of persuasion. And style was the thing that kind of made it palatable. It's the sugar in the medicine. The spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down. Or it's the parsley on the plate, or the sauce that you put on the meat, or the salad dressing. That kind of a thing. And it's extra. It's not really the thing. But if you think about it, a lot of times the sauce, and a lot of times the salad dressing, and a lot of times the seasoning is the meal in and of itself. It wouldn't be the meal without it. And I think that's what Tyndale's trying to get us to think about is, are these things really additional, or is style anything that we could call mere? Like when you think about style, that's how you know what discourse is important and what's not. So, we're here on YouTube. I like to talk a lot about the YouTube style. And the YouTube style is something like, hey everybody, what's up? It's your boy, Professor Steve. If you're new around here, this is my Rhetoric and Argumentation channel. Like, comment, subscribe, and hit that little bell so you don't miss a new video. All right, today we're going to be looking at the rhetoric of my Minecraft playthrough. Pew, 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 pew. I wish I had that sound on my soundboard, but I don't. Need to get that one. So that would identify. Now that just seems like extra. I could say that in any way I wanted to, and that seems like extra, but what that does is communicate where you are and what kind of attitude and what kind of mindset one should be in to hear the speech you're about to hear, or to hear the discourse that you're about to hear. This kind of YouTube vlogger let's play discourse. And then there are also YouTube vloggers who thwart that style and they move against that style. And the only reason that you can recognize that is because you're very familiar with the like, hey, what's everybody? It's a new vlog, it's my channel, like, comment, subscribe. Like, we expect to hear that. And so that expectation sets up the ability to invent new kinds of approaches to the audience. I'm getting a little bit ahead of where Tyndale is here, but Tyndale just at this point wants us to realize that style is not just ornament. Style is not mere. There's nothing mere about it. There could be mere style, but most of the time style is making a claim or an argument of some kind. And we need to be aware of that if we are interested in this idea of rhetorical argumentation. Sophia, what do you like about the book so much, Sophia? Let me ask you guys this. Have any of you attempted to or gotten really, really close on deleting your social media? Have you hovered your finger over the button because of the lane in your book? Has anybody done that? I'm very curious about this. Oh, I wonder if I could get some more people into the, I don't know if I want more people in here. I was thinking about putting this on my Facebook, but I don't know if I want those people in here. All right, so next he says that, Tyndale says, look, there are tons and tons of figures and tropes, and these things have different kinds of definitions. And some of these are structural, and some are different. But Tyndale does pause here to say the structure of a rhetorical figure is why it works so well. So he's talking about all the old theorists. This is kind of the place where he's sort of showing us that he has read some of the other thinkers and some of the other people on these ideas. And that there is some kind of agreement that there's a structural need for a figure or structural need for style. And once we have a figure and we can identify it that way, then maybe we can do something with it. It is kind of weird how much he goes on and on and on about this, I think. Oh yeah, so Sophia's been wanting to delete it for a while, but like I got rid of my Facebook a long time ago and I brought it back because I found it to be a useful way to communicate with people. I don't know what I would do without it. Instagram is kind of fun. I think I have some notes over here somewhere. Maybe I don't. I thought I wrote down some things that I thought would be important to talk about tonight. Maybe I didn't. Exceptional discourses. Well, argumentation might be an exceptional discourse. I don't know. Let's see. Maybe this is a note here. No. Well, I'm not sure what I did with it, but I thought I had some notes to talk about it. Yeah, I probably should have done that. I just found that I had a couple of different ways to get in touch with students. One was email, which took several days to respond. One was Facebook, which they would respond to instantly. You know what's funny about Twitter? I think Twitter has the lowest amount of users of any of the social media accounts, but Twitter gets so much attention. And I think it's because Donald Trump uses Twitter the way most presidents would use the national media. He just goes to Twitter first, or he doesn't release press releases. He just puts things on Twitter, which is a huge change for the presidency. It's an unprecedented kind of thing. Is to just be posting. He's the first president to really post policy. So foreign governments like the German government, other governments have said, we look to Twitter as official U.S. government policy. Donald Trump tweets on it. We don't really have another option. He's not putting out press releases or things. In a strange act of kind of weird professionalism, he did send a memo to the Attorney General, and the Attorney General said, we're going to be investigating cities that do not support law and order, anarchist regimes. And we're going to be thinking about cutting the federal funding off to anarchist regimes like Seattle and New York City. Yep, media people have been on there, but I just think it's a little strange for it. Like the way Obama used Twitter was to kind of like hype up policies that had been established through traditional kinds of channels. But Trump is like the first time people are hearing about a policy is on Twitter. Which I think is a big change. But Twitter is a very small amount of people. I wonder what, and it's also a lot of Americans on there. Mostly Americans and a small percentage of the social media life. So I wonder why. So we're back to find stock again. And we're back onto schemata. And schemata is the Greek word where figurae or figures, figurae comes from Latin, which is where we get the word figures. And these are the kinds of things. This is any form which thought is expressed just as to bodies, which whatever their composition must have some shape. It means a rational change in meaning or language from ordinary simple form to say a change analogous that involves sitting, lying down, or something, or looking back. So quintillion, in this very, very Roman way. I mean, I'll let rhetoric prof speak about this some more. What could be more Roman than this kind of weird obsession with how the body is communicating who and what you are, particularly the masculine body for the Romans. A quintillion also advises that when you speak and argue, you don't look too effeminate because that would harm your argument. Something that we would consider pretty sexist today. But for the Romans, this was the communication of real meaning and real persuasion for them. And in fact, today, people still say similar things to this, like, make sure you dress professionally, make sure you stand up straight. These things communicate. But for quintillion, the body was how we understood a thing like a figure. So you have a body of text. If you lie that down or stand it on its head or something like that, then you're in the realm of the figure. Or the schemata, as you would say. He liked those Greek words, being a rhetorician himself. Also, he did not write this in 1921. He lived a really long-ass time ago. So Tyndale talks about how most of his buddies in the argument world are really occupied and kind of obsessed with schemes, because they think of them as the most argumentative things. And then the Canadian school of argumentation theory, Douglas Walton and all that, they really took off with schemes. In fact, Walton has written several books that just kind of outline schemes and kind of this very strange algebra. So here's an example of this from Walton's book. If X is a person of good moral character, then what X contends, A, should be accepted as more plausible. A is a person of good moral character. Therefore, what A contends, A, should be accepted as more plausible. So this is kind of a map of how arguments tend to work and what their structures are. So is this structure like prescribed by Walton? Is he saying you should argue like this? Or is he saying this is how people argue in the world and you should be aware of it? And I think the answer to that, well, it might be something we can talk about. But I think the answer to that is somehow both. Like in the Canadian argumentation school, what they're looking at is the way people do things and then trying to model it in ways that make it a little bit better. So it's a bit prescriptive, and Tyndale is a part of this crew as well. He doesn't do the argument schemes. Actually, he's about to be kind of critical of them. But argument schemes are nice because what they do is they give people kind of a way to create arguments that work, but also a way to kind of edit and form them in a way that makes them kind of better than what you might do naturally. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but I think maybe that might be a good way to think about it. So for example, if you wanted to, you could look at Walton's book, Argument Schemes. The library has it on the digital books. You can have a look at it. It's just full of these kind of things. Exactly this. Like, this is the kind of thing that it's full of. How to make these kind of arguments. So Tyndale says, as we see it, is how acceptability is transferred within the pattern that is at issue. So the acceptability of it transferred through the pattern doesn't quite get there for Tyndale and what he's trying to do. He does say that argumentation schemes are useful for the evaluation of arguments. And this is a big point of contention I have with a lot of argumentation theory that we're going to be reading, that we're going to be looking at. A lot of my concern is that people look at things that are meant to kind of analyze whether arguments are good as kind of the ways to make arguments. Like Stephen Toulmin, who we're going to get to in the next unit. Actually, we might be reading him in this unit. I don't remember. Maybe in unit 3. So here are the questions that one would answer in order to figure out whether or not you would use that argument scheme. A lot of times these things look like a way to make arguments, and I think in this case, this is kind of a good way to see if you can make an argument of saying, okay, well, I want the audience to do X. I want them to accept X as a premise. I have this quote from this person who they admire, who's admirable, saying it. So, well, maybe I'll just, maybe I'll go with that. Maybe I'll push that onto them and they'll believe it. Because that person is considered to be morally good, then since they want to do it, that argument will be morally good. And that's kind of how these arguments, I think, work. Okay. So he's talking about the scheme, and he's saying, what matters to us is the specific ways audiences are moved from considering reasons to considering conclusions. That's kind of his definition that he's working with what rhetorical argumentation is. Remember, in the first part of the book, he talked about how many people have covered the product aspect of argumentation. What counts as a logical argument, a valid logical argument. That's the realm of philosophy and traditional argumentation studies. And then he said some other people, namely his colleagues in Canada, have considered procedure. And they're looking at dialectics. And the Dutch as well, you know, when they talk about Van Emeren. I know this will be important for Van Gogh, who's probably still here in the chat. These are your countrymen. These are your descendants. These are your compatriot Dutch. They also are interested in procedure. But what Tyndale wants to do is build it completely from process. Start there and move back towards procedure and towards product, because those are like overcovered, and then no one really talks about the audience as anything other than the people who are supposed to receive the argument. They don't really have much of a hand in the making of the argument. I think it's kind of a weird way to think. If you look at the history of argumentation, it's a very weird way to think. Nobody's really given audiences that much sway. Okay, so let's go down here a little bit further. I'm going to make a video about this anyway, because I'm not really very happy with how I'm talking about this. And I know I can do this a little bit better if I'm just recording a video. So he's going to go back to what he said earlier, and he says, now remember in chapter 1, this is just what I talked about just now. We focus on the argument situated components of arguer, audience, and argument, with the last being determined by the others. Now that's a big change. That's very strange. Because most people would say that the argument is what you make first, and then you go as the arguer in front of an audience. And Tyndale's saying it's a very limited conception. An argument for him is the discourse that centers and develops in the argumentative situation. As far as rhetorical figures form such discourse as their devices of argument. So this is the thesis of the whole chapter here. If you understand this, you've got the whole chapter, which is rhetorical figures are not just ornament. Rhetorical figures don't just make people's speech sound better. They're not just entertaining. They're not just attention grabbing. A lot of people will say, you might remember from high school English, a lot of people will say, oh, just use this kind of alliteration to get attention, get people to read. And these kind of things have force the way your argument from your library source would have force. Is sort of what Tyndale's saying. He's interested in argument as something that is emergent. I like that word a lot. Emergent. It means that we don't really know what it's going to be, but we kind of know the conditions of it. Let's talk about an emergent piece of rhetoric that everyone's familiar with, and that would be sports. So when you are a sportscaster, you're watching basketball. I know everyone's interested in the NBA situation right now. NBA finals, right? Or semifinals or something. I don't know. I don't really follow it. Or tennis, the Italian Open is going on right now. Or football. Football's a big, college football for the SEC is starting, I think, on Saturday. When you're watching a football game, you don't know what's going to happen. But what emerges out of it is a story. So sportscasters are like, the hero of this game is the quarterback who really rose to the occasion. He started off slow, and he really picked up the energy in the second half. Now, all of that is stuff they're just kind of making that story sound like a preconceived kind of thing. And those stories are emergent. Emergent narrative is a very powerful force. Now, what Tyndale's trying to do, and this is really strange, is he's saying argument is like the story of a football game. It's emergent from the scene. An arguer goes in with an attitude and with a some kind of a desire, I guess we would say, and an audience shows up with the same thing, and out of that combination, one gets what he would call an argument. An argument's not your pre-prepared document that you walk in there with. What do you guys think about that? Rhetoric Prof says, crazy. Alan says golf. I think golf is a great example of that, where it's like the story today played out on the back nine, where Alan Smith, it was just 1 under par. Up until today, only 1 under par. Got a birdie on 17. Moved him into position. Everything relies on this putt. No. That's probably too old for you guys. Caddyshack? I don't know. I don't know if you guys watch old movies. Caddyshack's a really old movie now, if you think about it. So in the next paragraph here, let me know in the chat. Type in your response. What do you think about that? Emergent argument. That's the way to think about what Tyndale is saying here. He's like, the best way to understand argument is a discourse that develops in that situation. So it's whatever comes out. And I mean, you've had this experience. Have you ever gone to present a paper, your work, do a presentation in a class? And when you get there and you start talking, the way the audience is responding, you start changing it up. Or maybe you're like, this isn't what I had on my paper, but this sounds good. I'm going to say it right now. What accounts for that? What accounts for that change? It's the presence of being there with others. Yeah, it is old, Rhetoric Prof. Work with marketing too. Marketing is kind of an interesting thing because we think we know what marketing is, but anybody who works in marketing will tell us that most of the work we don't see, which is things like focus groups and test audiences and things like that. So when you think about what's going on, so for example, the long-running soap opera, The Young and the Restless, they do all the testing of their storylines in Las Vegas, the Bellagio Hotel. You pick up a phone there, and if you can answer the trivia questions about deep Young and the Restless history, then you are a true fan. They'll let you come to the research. And what they do is they show you a bunch of different clips of upcoming storylines, and you turn a knob that's like a 0 to 9 and let people know what do you like and what you don't like about what you're seeing on the screen. And you're supposed to keep your finger on that and move it. And they show you probably, out of the 10 scenes they show, 6 of them they won't ever air. But they're just constantly shooting content. And then looking at audience research to see what keeps people clued in. So when we look at marketing, we see that there's this huge amount of I don't know if it's emergent, but this huge amount of what Tyndale's talking about, the discourse that finally winds up as the television show, or the discourse that finally winds up as the commercial, is something that's been through a lot of different kinds of rigorous engagement. And you could say the people who came in to test the text have a lot more hand in what that commercial looks like than the people who initially drafted and wrote the commercial, I would say. Yeah, Rhetoric Prof, that's a good point. Takes us out of the idea of reason claim. This is kind of the popular view of science, right? That science would just be like, here are the reasons why this is true. End of conversation. But if you ever know any actual scientists, not just scientists who like to host shows on National Geographic or talk on Twitter or debate creationists, actual scientists, they are really interested in conversation and discussion and question, in the same way a detective might be. Not in a way of like, well, these are like a TV detective where it's like, well, these are the facts, so this is what's going to happen. They're much more interested in sort of trying to figure out the relationship well beyond just reason claim is the argument. Here you go. And I also think that this idea that Rhetoric Prof talked about in the chat here about it being always between people is a very good point. This is Wayne Brockreedy's idea from Unit 1 that lots of you wrote about in your papers, that argument is a human, like he doesn't say what is argument, he says where is argument. It's also kind of one of these things that like, if you're defining argument, can you do it in a way, or should you do it in a way that ignores, what would you call it? People. Can you do it in a way that's like not people? Oh, look at that. I'm on with Donald Trump. Oh, who's getting more viewers? Well, Donald Trump has 58,000 viewers on his live feed right now, and I only have 7. So that is uncool. Not sure about that. Thanks for posting that in the Agora, Alan. Lovely. So in the next part here, Tyndale is going to kind of like say, hey, you know, guilty as charged. I already did this. I already used schema and figures and things like that. I already did that in my book already. We're in chapter 3 and I did this. Then he's like, let's go back and look at the greatest hits. I did an ad baculum. That's when you use force to argue something. I already did this. Then he's going to do what he's done in the last couple of chapters. This might be the part that might confuse everybody quite a bit. Which is the idea of like, okay, how do I understand this? Well, Tyndale is a scholar and he's writing for other scholars. And what's going to be required is that he goes and looks in detail at the person who last best wrote about the questions that he has. So this guy, Ribot, something like that. He's looking at figures as argument. And so this is somebody who Tyndale really has to deal with in a serious way. If he's going to say anything about it. You can't just go in and say what you think about something without accessing and looking at everyone who said it before. It's just like if you go to a party and people are talking about the Jets, you wouldn't want to just like barge in there and give your opinion about the Jets and what they need to do. You'd like to kind of listen and see what's been said before so you can make so you can have a hot take. So you have a really good opinion and a hot take. That's what you want. You can't just go charging in there like a bull. You kind of got to listen for a second. And this is the equivalent of how we do it in writing. So when you guys are thinking about when you're doing your oral presentations for the assignments and you're doing your papers, think about, using a little bit more of the text from the readings and kind of setting up and saying, look, here's the way these two essays are talking to each other. And my interjection is this. You guys had brilliant interjections and brilliant things to say. But it would be better if it was framed a little bit more in terms of like, I am in the conversation with these people too. A couple of you did a pretty good job with that, but I think all of us could maybe improve that. It's a difficult thing to do. It takes some time, and you're certainly not going to get excellent at it in my class, but you'll get started. I think you'll be on your way there. This is him reviewing Ribot's argument, which seems like a pretty good. He kind of likes it. He's kind of into it. But then comes the criticism. He's a little bit less forthcoming concerning how irony increases the link between the speaker and the public, and some of these other things. And then overhearing. This is kind of the one that always gets people, is that when lawyers are talking or when lawyers are examining a witness, They already know what the witness is going to say. They never ask a question that they don't know already. How do they know? Well, everyone who's a witness has been deposed by the police. And the depositions, the lawyers have access to. So they know everything that the police know, whether they're defense or prosecution. And anybody who's been deposed has done it under oath. So if they contradict themselves on the stand, well, then they're going to have to pay a fine or maybe even go to jail, or depending on how bad the perjury is. Perjury is when it's proved that you've lied, because it kind of ruins the whole law thing. I don't know what to call it. Ruins the whole law ideal. So when lawyers are asking these kind of questions and acting surprised, it's all for the benefit of the jury who doesn't have access to the depositions. So this is what Ryan was talking about. Ribble makes this case considering metaphor. And metaphor is probably the thing that has been studied the most, Tyndale says, as an argument. And I think that's true. I think in the ancient world they even talked about metaphor as an argument. They didn't make a distinction. They didn't say metaphor is a way to argument or metaphor is a figure that can enhance argument. They didn't do anything like that. They said this metaphor, or, Socrates does this a lot, like as the blah, 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 blah relates to the blah. I can't think of a good example, but this also happens in ancient Greek thought too. So this is how Reboul breaks these things down in terms of logic. So the proverb is, one swallow does not make a summer. I should put that in my email signature for my university email account. What do you guys think? Good idea? Bad idea? I might just reply to every single email I get from the dean's office with one swallow does not make a summer. One swallow does not make a summer. Wisdom. Wisdom, my friends. I wonder if this thing is still working. Let's take a look. Okay, good. Still going strong. Yeah, let 1,000 flowers bloom. That's a good one too. So the way this works is he has the theme and the foray. It's kind of a weird thing. So the theme is one good piece of news, and the foray is the swallow. So the foray is like the encapsulation or the transformation of the explicit thing that it is into the kind of the implicit form. Does not guarantee happiness is like, does not make a summer. So it's like less cool to say one good piece of news does not guarantee happiness. It's much cooler to say one swallow does not make a summer. Yeah, I'm wondering, I think Rhetoric Prof, the reason he's not talking about that so much is I think he's trying to address this guy because of Reboul's position in the argumentation literature that Tyndale thinks is most important and vital to address. But yeah, vehicle and tenor is a lot better for thinking about this kind of stuff. Is that a Rimbaud, or is that Recur, or I forget what metaphor person talked. It might be Recur who talked about that. It's been a while since I've looked at that metaphor stuff. So Tyndale kind of takes this on and says, this isn't really as strong an argument as it could have been. This isn't really as strong. Is it Richards? That makes me embarrassed that I don't know that. Vehicle and tenor. It does sound like Richards, doesn't it? Man, I kind of thought I was an IA fanboy, but maybe not. Got to go back and look at that Richards. Oh, yeah. So here we can look at this. He's talking about this analogy and how the metaphor is an argument in the sense that it draws its strength from the analogy that it condenses. But that analogy itself is not clearly an argument. at least not a clear argument from analogy, where a conclusion is drawn that has an analog has a feature X on the basis of its similarity to another analog known to have feature X. Rebot's proving of B does not proceed in this way. In fact, as a proof, this seems very weak in the persuasive sense that Reboul understands argument. Alternatively, if we see argument having wider goals than just persuasion. Now again, this is the thing that comes up quite often in this reading, is Tyndale does not want you to associate persuasion and argumentation. What does he want us to associate argumentation with if it's not persuasion? I think most people would say the reason you get into an argument is to persuade somebody, right? So what is Tyndale trying to advance here? What does he think argumentation is best thought of? Not persuasion. He wants to disconnect that. He says that that's a big problem with it. That's why we don't have rhetorical argumentation. It's because it only has this one goal. Goals like contributing to understanding and insight. Now, that's kind of an interesting way to think about argumentation, is that we just gain a better understanding of a position, or we gain insight into the controversy. We gain insight into the different positions people could have. It's kind of a pretty cool thing to think about. The sense, if we think about it as having understanding insight, then the sense of a metaphor operating as a condensed analogy does have argumentative value in the way it can bring about a change in the audience's perspective. It's a big thing for Tyndale, by having them view a situation in a different light. This is at least how Reboul's example works. However, Reboul's most interesting discussion is reserved for his last question. Is not argument itself a figure? His principal claim here is that argumentation is indissociable from the figures it uses, although this does not show up in most post-Perlmanian studies of argumentation, because they invent fictitious arguments rather than using real ones. Ooh, sick burn, bro. What's Tyndale saying here? He's saying, well, if people after Chiron Perlman and Lucy Ulbricht-Tidica's book, New Rhetoric, had used real arguments, well, this would have been more apparent. But when you kind of invent arguments, like hypothetical arguments to study, you wind up with these things that are disassociated from or distant from the way people actually argue in real life. Now, Perlman and Ulbricht-Tidica don't do that, but everyone after them, probably not using real world arguments to the extent that Perlman and Ulbricht-Tidica, they did it in a kind of a crazy way, kind of a very seriously crazy way. This claim is supported by identifying several key features of argumentation. 1, to be effective, argumentation must build on the consensus it establishes with the audience, taking into account features of that audience. Okay, so that means what? To be effective, it must build on what's there, but also build on the consensus that as you start to speak, that audience begins to change into the audience. So as you start to address an audience, they're going to start to move towards or around or around with you to kind of try to fit and try to move into the space that you're kind of saying the audience inhabits. 2, argumentation uses natural language, which is naturally figured. Yeah, we speak in ways that we would hope that people would understand us. Argumentation does not have the rigor of demonstration, a point that has been emphatically made by Perlman and Ulbricht-Tidica. That's right. Argumentation is not demonstration. But demonstration is not better than argumentation. Demonstration is alongside argumentation in the terms of Perlman and Ulbricht-Tidica. It's kind of an important distinction to make. He's not wrong here, but it's an important distinction to make, that when you want to demonstrate something, you're not necessarily doing it better than if you argued it. It's just a choice that one would make based on what one's trying to do and based on the situation of what's required. For example, sometimes in science or in medicine, one has to demonstrate rather than argue in order to get one's point across. And argumentation is always opposed to other argumentation, and thus is polemical in its essence. These characteristics of argumentation, we realize, are also features of the rhetorical figures. It is because argument possesses the same status of imprecision, intersubjectivity, and polemic that it can be viewed as a figure. So that's actually kind of a very cool thing to think about, because if argumentation is a figure, then what is it that we're studying here? Are we studying something that people could mistake as ornamenting discourse? Well, yeah. I mean, I think that's kind of an obvious one in my view. If you look to the world, people think of argument as an extra thing that we don't really need. They say, oh, why are you trying to argue about this? Just look to the facts. Just look to what science tells us. Just look to what's true. We don't need to argue about this. Or when you think about the upcoming presidential debates, how do people talk about that? Well, the debate is going to show us how these people really are, or what they really believe. Or we're going to get to test them and see how they do under pressure. It's not about how anyone's mind is going to be changed, or about how the arguments are really going to do anything. The arguments are always kind of ornament to something that's more real, that's occurring elsewhere. Yep, Athletics of Discourse per Quintilian. Absolutely. Like the Romans, particularly, I mean, Quintilian, I don't know if he's a representative of the Romans, but because he's a little bit later than what we think of as like classical Rome. But I do think that there's a pretty interesting thread in there where the Romans are really thinking about everything in relation to the athletic body, the well defined male body, and that becomes a metaphor for everything healthy. So when you're thinking about speech and you're thinking about argument, you're thinking about wrestling, you're thinking about the centurion, you're thinking about the warrior, you're thinking about the somebody who's kind of swole as the metaphor for that. So the other thing we can think about, that's kind of the bad one to think about, is that we could think of argumentation as an extra thing that doesn't really have a lot of value in society, and it might be something we're better off without. It might be true. I mean, it might be better to have discussions, or it might be better to just use facts or something like that. But what if argumentation is just a figure? What does argumentation become? A perspective. And it becomes a perspective like any perspective that adds value to what it looks at. It adds value to what it considers. And that might be a way to think about argumentation in a very positive and really kind of constructive way, is that if we take on argumentation, I'm not trying to persuade you. I'm not trying to tell you you're wrong. I'm not trying to tell you to give up your beliefs. What I am doing instead is I'm going through a perspective gaining exercise in order to get you to look at a lot of things that would not have come up about this issue in the first place, just based on your own ability to kind of look at it or talk about it or whatever. So I kind of like this idea of argument as perspective, and I think that's kind of what Tyndale's getting to here. So Ribble shows his true colors here, that the essence of rhetoric is persuasion through discourse. Nope, that's going to be a wrong answer for Tyndale, because it is too limiting a goal for rhetorical argumentation. Is supported neither by the origins of the tradition nor by current models. And that's what chapters 1 and 2 are about, is that the sophists and even Plato, this wasn't what argument was meant to be. Argument was a way of playing around with words to show that there are many different possible perspectives people could take. That's what the sophistry was about. Changing perspectives is not persuasion. I think that's an important thing about this chapter that Tyndale pushes. All right, on to the coolest people ever. Kyron Perlman and Lucy Ulbricht Stidicka wrote a really cool book that if you really want to be cool like me, you can have 2 copies of. I might have 3, actually. No, I think I just have 2. Their study of rhetorical figures is important, even though they are interested in techniques of persuasive discourse. I don't know about that. I mean, adherence can be a lot of things. They say, Perlman and Ulbricht Stidicka say, and we're going to read a little bit of them later in the term, they say that argumentation is about adherence. It's about audience and getting audience to adhere to a position. Now, is that persuasion? There's that something else. What does it mean to adhere to a position? Adherence might not be persuasion. Adherence could be like, wow, I see. That sure is a sticky point. I really like that. I'm attracted to that. I might not believe it, but I can see why people would be. Now, is that persuasion? I don't know. Maybe. It's certainly not kind of that raw, kind of vulgar idea of persuasion where one just kind of gives up one's views and moves on from that. Okay. Figures cannot be identified in advance. They are always emergent of where argumentation is taking place. And that's something Perlman and Ulrich Stiddick are very clear about. The reason why is because they wrote their book purely inductively. They didn't take any kind of assumptions from philosophy or anything, and they just went out and looked at philosophy, law, other kinds of writing, and other kinds of speaking going on in the world, things happening in the government, things like that. And I think that this perspective meant that they said that things are kind of emergent out of what they're finding is where they put their theory together. Okay, so this is kind of a redefinition of what some of these things, some of these figures are for them, and then some of the critics of them. So yeah, I'll probably go into this in a little bit more detail later on. So I think he likes Roman Ulbricht Stiddick a little bit more because they're a little bit more fluid. They're a little bit more moving into figures as productions of the moment, and then those produced figures have impact and have influence over the way the audience is seeing the situation or seeing the argument. They facilitate, he says here in the last paragraph, and the change of perspective is kind of what they're pushing at, which I think is more on the lines of what Tyndale wants. Then he's really, really, really happy with Feinstock, who is talking about how in scientific writing, rhetorical figures have really impacted and have really changed and have become the heart of scientific reasoning. And that's what they're talking about here is that, and one of the big points that Feinstock makes is that arguments are not thought about, they're experienced. Like you feel the force of them. When somebody makes a really good argument, you feel something. And when somebody makes a cool figure that makes you think, you feel that. It becomes this kind of experience that you have rather than something you're just looking at with cold logic. And I don't think it's a negative thing or a bad thing to talk about emotion. Some people, when you're writing your papers and talking about it and stuff, you kind of felt like you kind of took that position that good argumentation would be free of emotion. I just don't know how that would be the case. I think when most people say this is a logical argument, this is reasoned discourse, this is reason, what they're really doing is trying to avoid saying this is my preference. And these are ways that they can do that, because if you say something's your preference, you have to defend it. You have to defend it all the time. If you say something's logical, you have the greater weight of it not having much of anything to do with you at all. It doesn't have anything to do with your preference or your feelings. What it has to do with is what's true and what makes sense to everyone who would encounter it, who can think. That's the value of saying something's logical. Well, just look at I don't understand how people just don't accept the logic of this argument. Well, it might be, you might think of it as something that's irrefutable, something that you could not see any alternative to, but other people can see it very differently. That's what argument deals with, is this kind of perspective investigation and looking at different ways to see things. Oh, so the next chapter is Bakhtin. But the idea that arguments can be analyzed as things is a very popular idea that has kind of seeped into all of our discourse, our daily life discourse, everything like that. That's just not really the case. I don't think it's really the case. and neither does Tyndale. They're much better to think of them as experience rather than things that get analyzed. Presence, another Perlman-Ulbricht-Stidicka idea, is that it's kind of a cross between attention and ideology, what people automatically and already think are important things. Presence is how a rhetor will bring a particular perspective or a particular claim to the foreground of whatever it is they're talking about. Presence puts something immediately in the mind of the audience, but also presence makes sure to get attention and keep attention on things too. It's kind of a combo of those things, but presence is very important for their idea of argumentation. And then Fangstock talks about the enthymeme as cooperation. And I think that's a very good idea, is that the audience is making the argument along with the speaker. How could it be otherwise? When someone makes an argument, they want you to kind of react to it. They want you to think of it. They want you to kind of nod or something. That's like co-construction right there. So we talk about antimetaboly, talk about these figures. It's a very good analysis kind of thing about gradatio, moving in terms of degree, moving up in terms of getting the force by moving from one step to the other. You move towards very small kind of steps that are kind of obvious, all the way towards a very large conclusion that at first you wouldn't see how you would be able to get to that conclusion. So he's going through all these different kinds of tropes and things. And now he's going to go into some examples. Here's his rules that he came up with in this chapter. It might be something you want to use. So let's talk about this for a second. A figure is an argument. Now, he preserves a space to where figures cannot be arguments. Figures could be ornament, or they could do something else. But a figure serves as an argument when, one, it has a recognized structure. It's codified. That means you could look at it in terms of a figure like Douglas Walton, or you could say that it has a structure that's similar to other kinds of arguments you've seen out there. Two, its interactivity promotes the movement from premises to a conclusion. That means that the figure itself assumes that there are these premises, these things that people already kind of know, acceptable conditions, and then takes those and moves those in a way towards something new, something different, something that's not present there. And then three, as one of the goals of argumentation, either persuasion, perspective changing, understanding, or insight, which I think are the goals that have been enumerated so far in the book. So when we start looking at things from a rhetorical point of view, we change the way we approach argumentation. We would say things like, how is this discourse experienced? Or how does it invite collaboration? These are kind of weird ways to think about argumentation, aren't they? Compared to what you might have thought before you got into the class. Because that argumentation is really about this kind of inventive, creative, felt moment. He says there are too many figures. We can't look over them all. But let me look at this Salman Rushdie novel. And here's an example of a couple of them. Now, are they arguments? And he runs it through his rules. Here's how illusion works in terms of a figure. So he's doing a lot of like formulaic math kind of stuff here. You can look at that. I'm not going to go over it in great detail. These are just kind of examples proving his point. But the most important thing about this section is the idea that something that just sounds like pretty speech could have the force of argument if we take the rhetorical perspective. And something that just helps the audience pay attention or bring something to their mind, like a device that we would use to attract attention, or a device they might use to explain something very meaningful or important. That has argumentative force. And he's looking at Plato's Apology here, which is Socrates' defense to the Athenians at his capital trial, which did not go very well, but we still study it. Yeah, go figure that one out. The guy was executed, and we're like, look at this masterwork of speech. Yeah, they killed him, bro. I don't know what to say about that. They get into some bioethics arguments. I think bioethics is kind of a cool... I should probably put that in the discourse, because bioethics is a cool way to kind of practice and talk about argumentation. I think. Gee, I wonder if anybody's still listening. Any questions about anything at all? Any questions about anything at all? Kind of feel like I'm gonna have to do this over anyway. I kind of feel like I missed a couple of things here. So these are all very good examples from, and Tyndale's great. Use examples from philosophy, use examples from the media, use examples from politics, use examples from everything. And I think that's really, really good because he's kind of trying to show you, based on which one you like the best, how the things he's talking about work. I think that's really, really, really good. Alan's just chilling. Very good. I wonder what happened to Van Gogh. Wonder if Van Gogh's just chilling still. Okay. So here's the conclusion, where Tyndale will always kind of go over what he did. So if you're having trouble with these chapters, you might go look at the conclusion first, because it'll kind of give you the spoiler of what he's trying to do in the course of the entire chapter, and it might make it easier to read for you. Because if you know what the guy's up to, where he's going to end up, then you might understand why he's going about it the way he's going. So he's saying, look, a lot of people have talked about figures and argumentation. Some of them have gotten closer to others, but nobody has really gotten completely to where I want to be, which is to say some figures do a lot more than ornament. Some figures are arguments, and it's good to think of arguments as it's good to think of figures as these powerful arguments that move people and can shape into different kinds of ways of understanding and having insight. Ryan asks, could the uses of argument be to better our lives, arrive at decisions, and dignify others? I think absolutely. Absolutely, I think so. I think that's a really nice way of doing it. Now the question will be, how are you gonna explain and justify that theory of argumentation? What does it mean to better our lives? What would that look like? How would we know our lives are better? Arrive at decisions. I think that's probably a really very defensible one. But maybe people might say, well, are there better ways to arrive at decisions? Is argument really a go? Doesn't argument push us away from deciding? Doesn't it separate us, divide us? And then, what was the last one? Dignify others. Actually, dignify others is a really good, one that we're going to be talking about in terms of Douglas Inninger's work. Douglas Inninger is a really fascinating character because he wrote these really brilliant essays, and then he wrote a book that I have a lot of problems with about debate called Decision by Debate, where he basically renders debate as the action that we do to make better decisions. And it's kind of been uncritically accepted by lots of people who should know better. Like, is debate really the way to arrive at the best possible decision? Like, first of all, are we always debating decision-making kind of things? Are we debating other things like who's the best running back, or what's the best summer drink? I mean, it doesn't mean like we're arriving at a decision of these are the only drinks we're ever going to make at parties or something. Doesn't make any sense. Alan wants to know what the basic idea of what a figure is. Yeah, we can do that. So a figure is, these are ancient ideas that actually, if you went and looked at any Renaissance book of about argumentation, you would find lists and lists of these things. Okay, so here's an example right here. I knew if we just went back a little bit, we'd find one here. Oh yeah, Argument is Method by Douglas Inninger. Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, I think that Inninger is very, very interested in argument going well beyond this idea of convincing people or finding the truth or anything like that. Inninger believes, and this is a little bit of moving head, Douglas Inninger believes that argumentation is one of the best ways one can enact human rights. Because instead of telling somebody what to do or what to believe, or tricking them into it, if you argue You're engaging in a kind of a relationship with another human mind in a way to say, you are capable and worthy of drawing a conclusion based on a very open-ended expression of evidence, elements, ideas, and things like that. And he says that's the best way to confer human rights on somebody. It's the best notion of respect, instead of tricking them or telling them, here's what you need to believe, or you stupid people, here's what you need to know. That diminishes and dehumanizes people. But if you want to think about human rights as an action that we could do every day, instead of something like codified by the United Nations or codified by documents like the U.S. Constitution or other legal documents in the world, you would want to think about it as everyday actions where you say, I respect you as a person. Because what happens when you enter into an argument, you're also saying, look, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. Like, if I can't prove this to you, then maybe I'm the one who should change their mind. Maybe I should go and reevaluate my thinking and my feelings about this. Kind of a cool thing. We'll get to that in a little bit with integer. Maybe we could do integer tonight too. It's pretty good too. I don't know what you guys might want me to cover. There's a lot of reading in each of these units, and we got about half an hour left on the stream. I'll put it to viewer's choice. But for Alan, let's look at this example. So antithesis. This is a classic figure. They all have these Latin or Greek names. The antithesis is a figure that sets contrasting or opposing terms in balanced or cola or phrases. For example, you have everything to win and nothing to lose. That's the classic anti-metabole that you see. So what you do is you put contrasting phrases or cola, like little, I don't know how you would define that, but little snippets, little utterances, and you put them against each other in a way to have a kind of a force. Now, these things are usually looked at as poetic language. That's what Tyndale's saying. This is like most people would look at, you have everything to win and nothing to lose, as kind of poetic language. He's saying it's much more than that. He's saying these are argumentative. They're not just beautiful figures. They're things that actually have some force on people. I am gonna make a video about attitudes towards history. That was a weird thing, wasn't it? Kenneth Burke is a weird guy, yeah? Attitudes towards history. Should we do that next? We can go through attitudes towards history. That'd be kind of cool, actually. Yeah. Sophia, you want to do that? With attitudes towards history, the best thing is kind of to show you. I don't know. I might get copyright struck for this. But there are two music videos that I think really demonstrate Burke's point in attitudes towards history. So, in that section of attitudes towards history, Kenneth Burke is saying there are two perspectives that we can take on events that we find ourselves in. One is that we can take the frame of tragedy, that the way to resolve a conflict or disagreement is that somebody has to die. You have to have a great battle, and the protagonist and the antagonist fight, and one of them has to die. So it's very much like theater. One of the things to know about Kenneth Burke is he didn't think theater mirrored life. He thought that we mirrored what we see in theater. So you know how, like, your parents, your grandparents, or other people might say, oh yeah, don't watch too much TV, you'll get the wrong idea. That's not how the real world works. Da, da, da. Kenneth Burke would say, oh no, we learn a lot from TV. We learn a lot from theater. We learn a lot from drama. And that shows us kind of how to engage and deal with other people, how to get corresponding attitudes about other people. It's a very important word for Kenneth Burke. Let's bring it up. We can kind of go through it, yeah? Let's see if this works. Hopefully this is working. Oh, good. Okay. Next time, I promise. Well, there probably won't be a next time. I don't know, unless you guys like doing the live thing. We'll have to vote on it and see. I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of it. I'd rather just kind of make some videos and really make sure, do them a couple of times and really just make sure everything is, good. Okay, Let's see if this looks okay. Come on, canvas. Chop, chop. Really? Okay, there we go. Yeah. Attitudes towards history. Now, this book is basically a study of how history is influenced by our attitudes and how attitudes influence kind of like what we think history is and how these things move towards conclusions that are kind of pre-written in a way. So when we think about history, we're thinking about something that happened because of people's decisions. Burke is saying that history is happening because of people's attitudes. Certain kinds of attitudes have framed things different ways. Oh, look, I left all my notes in here for you. Okay. Can everybody see this okay? So what Burke is saying is that he wants us to think about, when we're thinking about making arguments, when we're thinking about how do we attribute things to people, what we really want to make sure that we have done is that we have had a attitude towards people that things are not set in stone, that things are not absolute. When we have the attitude that somebody is wrong and they need to be punished or they're at fault for something, we should probably take that with a little bit of a grain of salt and say, how do we know what their motives were? And then when we examine a situation where people are acting, what we find is that people's motives, there's a lot of different motives that we can prescribe to people, and that we can say that people are about. And we can make different choices about those motives. Like if we examine it, we can say, well, maybe it was more this rather than that. Maybe they were less evil and more just dumb, just to give an example. And as we kind of persuade ourselves about this, we can find different ways about towards people. So the thing about when we go into a situation, we say somebody's at fault, somebody must be punished. We're doing what's called tragic framing, or the tragic frame, which is very common, unfortunately, where people have to die and suffer for their mistakes, and that's what we call justice. Comic framing is based more on an ambivalent frame, which is, well, I don't really know. I can prescribe motives to somebody. I can say what their motives were, and I can make a convincing case. But that doesn't really go with the corresponding attitude of kind of an absolute punishment for them. Instead, our attitude should be one of ambivalence. One of, well, we're not really sure. And so that means that what we would do is primarily think about people as mistaken, not evil, not terrible, this kind of thing. So he's going on and on and on. Let me see if I can find the places that I think are the most kind of interesting parts here. I think it would be better if I made a video about this one, but I should give you a couple of ideas about it I should give you those music videos to look at it to kind of see what it is. So here's the part where Sophia is confused. So let's go back a paragraph or so, see if we can make some sense of it. Now that we kind of know what he's about. So the comic analysis of exploitation prompts us to be on the lookout also for those subtler ways in which the private appropriation of the public domain continues. Okay, what does that mean? It admonishes us that social exigencies and goodwill are as real a vein to be tapped as any oil deposit in a teapot dome. Addendum. Excuse me. Addendum 1955. Radio and TV channels and the private use of nuclear resources developed by the government would also be an obvious example. Okay, so he's saying that public goods through this kind of idea that the private industry is always going to be exploiting kind of public domains. This is probably explained a little bit higher in there. Yeah, that entire paragraph does that. But he's saying that what we should be looking out for is how these things move back and forth. So something that we consider private or something we consider public could be exploited by private interests in ways that would not be necessarily for public good or for our own help. So as we move down from that kind of discussion happening up here, the church thought of man as a prospective citizen of heaven. So he's saying the church perspective was that everybody is possible. They're getting ready for heavenly citizenship. They're getting ready to be somebody who's going to live in heaven and be a good citizen there. In time, the critical inaccuracy that such transcendental emphasis brought to the gauging of material relationships became bureaucratically exploited to its limits. So since that was the frame, and we were stuck in these sort of limited material relationships, we exploited it bureaucratically. Like there wasn't enough way to kind of organize and to kind of push this thing kind of through. Out of this overemphasis, a purely antithetical overemphasis developed. Against man as a citizen of heaven, thinkers opposed man in nature, and with the progress of efficiency and reasoning, we got simply to man in the jungle. A comic synthesis. Okay, so that's the kind of the tragic frame, which is since things got to the point where it could no longer be sort of held up because of material conditions and the limits of our bureaucratic ability to get things kind of into making sense, or to get things to kind of work in that frame of everyone's preparing to go to heaven. There's some people who are just kind of really screwed by material conditions. And antithetical overemphasis developed, which means people went to the opposite and they said, well, maybe man's just an animal. Maybe man is just in the jungle. Maybe there's just no, the best way to think of man is like as an animal. And he's saying this is kind of the tragic approach. But he says, now, if we took a comic framing of this idea of we're mistaken or that we're ambivalent or nothing is really that set, absolutely set, a comic synthesis of these antithetical emphases would transcend them by stressing man in society. As such, it would come close to restoring the emphasis of Aristotle with his view of man as a political animal. So this is kind of the way of thinking about it that's kind of a synthesis of both, of saying, yeah, people are not very nice to each other. They are kind of animalistic sometimes. But what kind of animal are they? Where are they best suited? Are they really that horribly, tragically animalistic? Or are they just trying to fit within this kind of nice kind of frame of both, this kind of combination of both as a political animal? I don't know if I explained that very well. But in the next paragraph, it might become a little bit clearer. Probably not, but we'll try anyway. In the motives we assign to the actions of ourselves and our neighbors, there is implicit a program of socialization. In deciding why people do as they do, we get the cues that place us in relation to them. So when we're talking about people as political animals, or we're talking about people as doing things based on motives, what we're doing more is we're kind of explaining ourselves to ourselves. We're also trying to relate to them, and a lot of times we might want to explain ourselves as being much better than our neighbors or better than other people. Oh, they're just doing that because they don't really understand how the economy works. Oh, they're just doing that because they don't really understand what the real world is. Or, oh, they think that the government's just going to take care of them. That kind of thing. So Burke is interested in this kind of everyday kind of argumentative claim. Hence, a vocabulary of motives is important for the forming of both private and public relationships. A comic frame of motives, this is what he wants us to do, instead of thinking people are absolutely firmly set in something. He wants us to think that people, we are merely attributing. We cannot know what they really want. And, you probably don't even really know what you really want. Have you ever sat down and thought, why am I doing this? Why do I want this? And you really couldn't come up with an answer. And you're like, maybe this is because this is what my dad wants. Or maybe this is because this is what my mom wants. Or maybe this is something I thought would be cool that my friends wanted. And you think, this is really the life I want. This is not my beautiful car. What is that song? This is not my beautiful house. And the days go by. Just thought of that. So the vocabulary of motives. The motives are why people do what they do. Explaining to ourselves why people do what they do is also by default an explaining of ourselves and how we're so much better than them, or how we're different than them, or how we're the same as them. And it sets up all of those different relationships. Yeah, you know what song I'm talking about, Rhetoric Prof, don't you? I'm sure you probably do. It's a Thomas Dolby. Isn't that the guy's name? I don't know. A comic frame of motives, as here conceived, will not only avoid the sentimental denial of materialistic factors of human acts, that is, this idea that somehow materiality doesn't matter that much. Everybody can kind of be a millionaire. Everybody can kind of be successful. Everybody can be, the talking heads. It says, okay. That everybody, so the sentimental dismissing of materiality is like, well, if you work hard enough, you can become president. If you work hard enough, you can become wealthy. This kind of, so materiality has to be kind of a part of it. But it would also avoid the cynical brutality that comes when such sensitivity is outraged, as it must be outraged by the acts of others or by the needs that practical exigencies place upon us. So this is very wordy. Burke is kind of very wordy. And I think I will need to do a more of a guide on this one so that you guys can really understand what he's saying here, because I think it's kind of an interesting bit. But he's saying that you need to have a vocabulary of motives, different kinds of motives, so that we won't immediately go to the idea of like, well, those people aren't good enough because they weren't able to transcend their material limits. Or the kind of brutality of like, well, that's reality, son. That's the world. That's just, I can't do it. What can we do about it? This kind of like very incredible positions that we can get into. Here, down here, this is kind of important here. The comic frame is a method of study. Man is eternal journeyman. What does that mean? It's kind of some sexist language there. But people as eternal journeymen, that means not master craftsmen, people who are working to become master craftsmen, people who are working to become masters of the art of being human. Man is an eternal journeyman. You're always working towards trying to figure out what it is to be human. And that's like a noble pursuit. Instead of saying that people are kind of stuck or framed in who and what they are in this very firm way, is a better personal possession in this respect than the somewhat empty accumulation of facts such as people greedily cultivate when attempting to qualify and Ask Me Another questionnaires, where they're invited to admire themselves for knowing the middle name of Robert Louis Stevenson's favorite nephew, if he had one. So this kind of mastery, Burke is kind of making fun of as the tragic frame, which is this idea that somebody who's sitting next to you and they're really getting off on being better at answering the Jeopardy questions on TV than you is not in the best position of excellence. That doubt and that working towards being a better human being is much better than this kind of idea of, well, I know a lot of trivia, or I've worked really hard, I've studied really hard, and look what I've amassed. It's much more of this idea of like, I'm not accumulating something empty, I'm just having experiences and I'm trying to figure out how to interact with them. And part of that is to be loose on motives, very loose on motives, instead of saying, well, here's what human beings actually are, or here's the way human beings actually should be dealt with economically. That all these things are kind of like, well, we're making our best guess, but it's kind of mistaken. The comic frame, in making a man the student of himself, makes it possible for him to transcend. He puts it in quotes, kind of weird. He doesn't really mean transcend. He's saying, I don't know a better word than this for this. Occasions when he has been tricked or cheated, since he can readily put such discouragements in his assets column under the head of experience. So think about when you're making a budget, or when you're looking at your bank statement. You might say, oh my gosh, I lost a ton of money on that. That was foolish. That was a loss. But Burke here is saying that if you learned something from it, or depending on how you frame that investment, maybe it was actually a gain in a way. You could actually count it as a gain when you're not dealing with money. So if you're tricked or cheated by interacting with people in a certain way, that doesn't mean that you were stupid or that you really didn't know what people's real motives or how people really are, which you hear a lot of people say, oh, well, you're the fool who trusted them. You should know that people are always going to take advantage of you like that. You should know that people will never be honest with you like that. These are the things Burke says are terrible, terrible ways of thinking about, talking about, and sharing society with each other. That those experiences are actually wins because, and he says it in the next line, thus we win by subtly changing the rules of the game and by a mere trick of bookkeeping, like the accountants for big utility corporations. Enron, hint, hint. We make assets out of liabilities, and we, in our humbleness, do better than apply in our own way the wise devices of these leviathans, thereby democratizing a salvation device as we encourage it to filter from the top down. It's kind of a crazy point of view. So he's saying, just like a big company can kind of cheat, we can kind of cheat in our lives and say, yeah, I guess we could call ourselves a loser, or we could say we lost out, or we could say we're a fool, but aren't those really like benefits? Aren't we really benefiting there? We might really be, these might be assets. These might be wonderful things that we learn from. We recognize our humility. We recognize our mistakenness. They become good stories, maybe. And these massive moments, we make them wise devices, and we take these kind of absolute moments of salvation devices, these truths that are meant to kind of knock us into our senses of who or what we really are, save us from our doubts. We actually democratize them, meaning, I mean, he doesn't really mean democratize, right? He put it in quotes again, but meaning that these devices become something everyone can use. They become the idea that everyone can kind of change their point of view and not necessarily feel downtrodden or kind of, I don't know, like you're an idiot for not have followed the truth. Alan asks, does he talk about how it can be both? Yeah, I think that's what he's saying, is that the entire reason that we can bring that into our realm is because we at first would want to call it a loss. Yeah, this was a terrible thing, but the tragic frame would say, you screwed up, it's irredeemable, you've lost out, you've got nothing, you idiot. Okay, so I failed the chemistry test, but I kind of realize now that maybe chemistry is not my thing. Maybe I shouldn't spend my life going to pharmacy or something. Maybe I should join that rock band or something. It becomes kind of an asset. Or you could say, oh gosh, hubris, oh man, I really thought I had that down, but I guess I'm not as smart as I thought I was. Maybe I should go and talk to my friend who knows about chemistry or something. So it's going to become kind of an asset, but in the big picture asset, it becomes a way of talking about ourselves that allows for change and alteration to occur. That's what Burke is most concerned about, is the way we talk about people. Like, for example, Burke didn't have this metaphor. Burke was dealing with a guy named B.F. Skinner. You might remember from psychology class or something. Burke is kind of a contemporary with B.F. Skinner. He's very concerned about Skinner. Skinner is the guy who came up with the idea of behaviorism. And Skinner would teach chickens how to play piano and baseball and stuff. You can go on YouTube and type in Skinner chicken baseball and watch chickens play a game of baseball. It looks like they're playing baseball. It really does. And he's conditioned them with food and reward to do certain things over a long period of time by punishment and reward or absence of reward and things like that. So oh, hey, Dutch driver. What's up, man? Good to see you. Yeah, Candide is kind of like Candide is actually a really, really good example of this. Like, let me talk about Candide for 1 second. Let me finish the Skinner point first. So Burke was incredibly concerned with this because what it made it look like is that everybody could be electrostimulated or reward stimulated into actions. And so our behaviors were nothing but these mathematical reactions to our environment. And so that meant that we really didn't have a lot of agency or choice, but also that however the environment was constructed was the way to change people's behavior. And there wasn't a lot of movement. And Burke is somebody who likes theory and liked theater and poetry. He was very concerned by this. And also the fact that if you think that there's only one solution to a problem or to a disagreement, well, guess what? You're going to do that solution. It might not be good. It might be war. It might be that people behave naturally like the tides. So you think about the tide coming in. You think about in World War I, the troops coming out of the trenches and how you can turn thinking, choosing people into these machines. It's kind of nightmarish for him. So he's very much against this. So in the broader view, he's saying, look, we have choices about the meaning of things. I know that sounds kind of dumb to say, but that's really what he's saying, I think, in this paragraph. I think that's what he's saying. Yeah, we win by subtly changing the rules of the game. So we explain it to ourselves in a different way. We change the motives. We change our attitude about it. And if things really worked in the behaviorist kind of way, we wouldn't be able to do that. Like a chicken can't do that, or a rat can't do that. Or, I mean, if they can do it, it's like done in a way that we don't have access to. But they can't do it the way that people do it. So we can say, hey, the reality is actually, hey, this was not a bad thing at all. Actually, it was a pretty good thing. Or like Alan's saying, yeah, it was bad, but, you know, it saved me from errors later in life. Like democratizing a salvation device as we encourage it to filter from the top down. So I think that's what he might mean, Alan. I think he's meaning exactly what you're saying. I think that's a good point to bring out. Now, on the point of Candide that Dutch Driver brings up, I think this is great because when we see in Candide, we say, this is the best of all possible worlds and all these horrible things are happening. Voltaire is kind of like pushing, I think, the idea that the comic frame of always looking for the good side can also be tragic too. It can also be tragic in the sense that we don't recognize that we can actually kind of alter what these things mean. Like when we're attributing motives and when we have attitudes about things, we're not reacting to reality. We're acting to motives that we've placed out there. That's what Burke is saying. And he's saying we always have a choice of how we're going to study and look at motives because we're always guessing when we're attributing motives. And then whatever motives we think someone has, a corresponding attitude will come back at us. You know, recently in the news, there's been a lot of talk about studies done about reading novels and reading fiction and how important that is politically. And what do these studies, these psychological studies say? They say the more fiction someone reads, the more sympathetic they are to people. The more they're like, oh, I can see how they could see that way. They're a lot less firm or a lot less convinced that there's only one way to look at something. And I think Burke would say, well, yeah, that makes sense because when you read a novel, it teaches you how to ascribe motives and how motives can change because you're putting your motives into a character, what a character thinks, and then you're also gaining an attitude to that character, but there's other characters in the book doing the same thing. And then there's the author's voice doing the same thing in the novel. So you have this big kind of combination of those things happening. So I think Candide might be an example of how the comic frame can become tragic if we think that it's an absolutely firm thing that we can always move things into the win column that are losses. That might be the way I would say Burke might look at Candide, but I think Burke wrote about Candide. I'm certainly not a deep enough Burkean to know everything he wrote about, but the thing to know about Kenneth Burke is that he was a vociferous reader and he is an autodidactic maniac and he read everything that there is to read. There's very few things in literature that he hasn't commented on, at least even as an aside. Very few things that are out of the range of Burke. And what's Burke's project? What is he after? He puts in his books ad bellum purificandum, Latin, towards the purification of war. So he thinks that people are always going to have hierarchy and always fight, but he'd like war to be something to where people didn't have to die. And he doesn't mean like drones and robots and stuff. I had a student who was like, oh yeah, drone warfare. I think Burke is onto something. That's the way to do it. Autonomous vehicles. No damage and blowing things up and bombs and stuff. But to think about this stuff as maybe more of a battle of perspectives might be one way to think about it. Another way might be to purify war in the sense that it's all about, can we find another perspective? Can we always find a new attitude? Can we evaluate the motives that correspond with our attitude, or are we always going to be stuck in our attitude as an absolute position that an absolute reality engenders? I think that's a really important kind of thing to think about for Burke. So, in sum, moving down the next paragraph there, in sum, the comic frame should enable people to be observers of themselves while acting. You guys ever do that? Embarrassingly so, I do all the time. I'm like, oh God, what must I look? Well, I'm an observer of myself as acting because I can look down on my other screen and see how the stream looks. I'm not sure that's what Burke means. comic frame should be enable people to be observers of themselves while acting. Its ultimate would not be passiveness, but maximum consciousness. One would transcend himself by noting his own foibles. He would provide a rationale for locating the irrational and the non-rational. Then he goes down into a long footnote about that. So what does this mean for, why did I assign this in argumentation? That might be the question. Like, Sophia asked a question. I'm sure she regrets now because we've been at this for about half an hour now. Why assign this in argumentation class? And here is my thought about this in terms of argumentation, is that we usually think about argumentation as being in service of some kind of set of facts or some kind of reality. We think of argument as being based on the best evidence and the best analysis of what's really out there. But what if that best would always contain some kind of kernel or some kind of flaw in it? And what if it's at our peril that we don't recognize that we're always kind of limited in this sense? What if we could take the comic view that, look, I'm offering this point of view in this argument, but it is a given that I'm mistaken, that I attributed these motives and gained these attitudes. I'm not passively responding to information. I'm not passively creating arguments in response to information. Instead, what I'm doing is I'm looking at information, I'm assigning motives. It kind of opens up an extra position there. And then I transcend myself by noting my unfoilables. Yeah, I'm assigning motives like we all do. There isn't any kind of, so a lot of times arguments get kind of heated or get kind of bad because people are like, well, how come you don't accept reality? Or like I talked about earlier in the stream, why don't you accept logic? Which is often a code word just for comfort, because what someone might say is logical is the attitude one would take by finding the motives of information logical, or the motives of the people put it together as being pure in some way. Or that they don't have motives at all. Like a lot of times we think about science as not having motives at all. That they're just out there getting hit in the face with discoveries. They run a formula and things pop out, and they don't really have motives at all. But I think we could say that the existence of even the most basic kind of thing kind of pushes against that. Like doctors, for medical research is motivated by the existence of diseases. I don't need to go into very much detail about that for that to make sense, do I? In our current world environment, right? So it's always motivated by something. And you could be cynical and you could say, well, oh, is science really motivated by the truth and making a better world? How come we have so many more drugs to cure baldness and sexual dysfunction in men, but we really don't have a very good treatment for breast cancer? Maybe the motives of science are sexist. Maybe the motives of science are generated to people who have money. Let's look at the kind of research that's done on diseases that affect non-white people disproportionately. And you look at the amount of money going there, and it's very low percentage-wise to things that are not directly disproportionately affecting non-white people. Or women, men. You can slice it up in many different ways. The point of this isn't necessarily to rag on science, but to say that motives are everywhere. And some people think if they found scientific evidence, that should just be enough to persuade. And they get really angry when people just don't kowtow to it. And they say, why don't you accept logic? But what they're saying is, why don't you have the corresponding attitude to the motives that are laid bare? And Burke would say, we need another step there when we're arguing. I think that's what he would say to us. He would say, we need another step. And that step is to say, these are the motives I found. And this is why I think these motives are there. And this is why I think these motives are good to think about. And that's why I have the attitude I have. You try to bring people over there, but you have the idea that when people are opposed to you, they're not wrong, they're mistaken. You have the attitude that the people have just seen it differently. And I think this is kind of like when people say, oh, we don't have a civic anymore. We don't have a civic environment. We don't have civic discourse anymore. I think this is what they're talking about, is we don't have this observer of yourself while acting attitude. When we're arguing with each other, particularly about politics, we say, oh yeah, these people are Democrats, they're my enemy. These people are Republicans, they're my enemy. they're wrong and they have to be like burned away, like some kind of or I gotta have to use a stain stick on these people's politics. Give me my spray and wash for these horrible Republican political thoughts. Or like shout it out. I don't know why I keep saying, like, I'm not being sponsored by anybody. I keep using these commercial phrases. They're that like ingrained in my head. I don't know. Well, I'll post the music videos. I'd like to watch the music videos with you because I think we'd get a kick out of it. Maybe I'll just put them in Discord. So for this essay, the way I normally teach it when we're like in person is I show a song by the band Genesis. Do you guys know Genesis? Phil Collins? Genesis? I know some of you are Genesis fans in the chat. Genesis, maybe? Am I mispronouncing it? The Genesis? 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 Oh, there we go. How did I... Oh, I like that GIF, Ellen. I'm just seeing that in the Discord. Very good. I thought it was Thomas Dolby, like a fool. So, Genesis, Phil Collins. They have a song called Land of Confusion. It's from the 80s. Not a big fan. Well, we'll convert you with this assignment, I think. So, in the 1980s, Genesis did a song called Land of Confusion. It's a political song. It's a very overtly political song, like saying the lyrics are, there's too many men, too many people making too many problems, and there's not much love to go round. Can't you see this is a land of confusion? That's the lyrics. Now, they did it in a style with puppets where they make fun of all the global leaders as being these kind of doofuses who are kind of bumbling along. Like they have Ronald Reagan was the president at the time. They have Ronald Reagan riding he thinks of himself as a big cowboy, American cowboy, but he's like riding a dinosaur, which is kind of a funny statement about who he thinks he is and how mistaken he is. And just how ridiculous all the world leaders are. And they're all done by these very caricature kind of puppets. Fast forward to like the early 2000s, and there's another band called Disturbed. I don't know if you guys know Disturbed. You guys didn't know Genesis. Well, Rhetoric Prof knows Genesis, but he's not a big fan. That's a shame. Disturbed made a heavy metal, like a metal cover of Land of Confusion. And their perspective is that it's global war of the autocratic people who dominate global politics from this like ivory tower of a wealthy guy kind of controls them all in this tower. And the people assemble and kind of storm the tower and basically kill this guy. And it's the same lyrics, same song, but the attitude is so different because the motives have shifted from a comic frame to a tragic one. So the way Genesis framed the politics of the song was a comic frame that we are observers of ourselves while acting. We have maximum consciousness, and we noted our own foilables. Like, oh, yeah, these people are kind of dorky, but we're the ones who put them in office. So who's really to blame here? It's kind of this goofy kind of silliness. Bert goes on for some examples here. I probably should make a video just about this essay. It's a pretty good chapter. I like it quite a bit. But I don't think I'll be able to play the songs without getting a copyright strike, and then I won't be able to use YouTube, which will be a shame. There might be a way around it. I don't know. I could play a little bit of it. I don't know. I got to look into it and research it, but I think they'll just block my YouTube if I did that. But I'll just put them up in Canvas and in the Discord as well, the Discord server for the class. The comic frame version of it is so different, and the lyrics are the same. Nothing's changed. It has maybe less of a pop sound in the music to more of a metal sound. And the whole attitude changed. I think it's a wonderful example what Burke is talking about is that you take this message of Land of Confusion and you put it in the tragic frame. Well, in order to get out of confusion, we've got to kill a whole lot of people. A lot of people have to die. Or we can say the land of confusion because we're all kind of confused, and let's kind of accept that. Let's realize none of us really know, and let's operate from that as the position of the political. So it's really about framing of arguments. And I wonder if you can find, like, for example, the Lanier book and the Joseph Ellis book, which are both things we're looking at in the class. Do you think Jason Lanier's position is tragic or comic in terms of social media? Is it that we're terrible failures that we can't use social media properly, or social media has to die? Or is it that we're just mistaken and social media is mistaken? Like, we're all kind of mistaken about what Facebook or Instagram is about. In the Ellis book, the Founding Fathers, are we the script? So, and Ellis has a chapter about the Second Amendment, which is, I don't know, it might be the best chapter in the book. We can debate about it, but in the Ellis book, I highly recommend you guys read this book. American Dialogue. Joseph Ellis is a Pulitzer Prize winning historian of American history. Brilliant guy. Love this guy. Really smart. Super wonderful dude. I'd love to hear him speak sometime. I don't know if we'll ever be allowed to go to lectures again, but if he comes to New York, I'll probably go see him. He wrote Quartet. He wrote Founding Brothers. All kinds of books about the founding of the United States. And in this one, somebody who has access to Madison and Jefferson and Washington's archives is probably the only person who could do this, like Joseph Ellis, who's a consummate, like an outstanding scholar. Can go into these archives and say, okay, what would Thomas Jefferson think about Black Lives Matter? And what would James Madison say about the contemporary NRA, National Rifle Association? And he makes these arguments. So in that chapter about the Second Amendment, he's pretty firm in his commitment that Madison did not mean that people should have military-grade weapons at all, or that everyone should be able to have a gun. It was a very limited scope, because Madison had choices about how to do that, how to frame that amendment. And he did it that way in order to make sure that muskets were in the hands of the people who needed it to be in part of the military, to defend themselves from existential threats. So he makes this argument. It's pretty solid, I think. Regardless of how you feel about gun control, it's a good argument that you have to take into account, I think. Once you've read it, you're like, ooh, man, if I want to defend gun rights, I need to take this argument into account pretty seriously. So in that one, is that tragic or comic? Are we just mistaken, or was Madison mistaken? Are we both mistaken? Framing rights is a very difficult thing that a human being would have a lot of trouble with. Or is it tragic? Is it tragic that Madison didn't go further? Is it tragic that we have abandoned Madison's vision for the Second Amendment? He's primarily the guy who wrote the Second Amendment. Actually, most of the Bill of Rights is Madison. He did most of it. I wonder if my commentary would be transformative, Dutch Driver. I wonder. Yeah, that the Sargon of Akkad fair use case is a good. There's also a fair use case of the H3 podcast as well. They had a fair use case where they were making fun of a guy's vlog, and the guy sued them for copyright violation on his vlog, and the judge ruled, well, it was obviously not a representation of the guy's work. It was a commentary on it for reasons, for important reasons. So maybe I could get away with it. I don't know. I mean, I feel like we'd have to kind of sit and watch it a bit, but I could stop it and talk about it, I think, from point to point. Maybe that would do it. Yeah, I don't want to do that, Alan, because then they won't take the strike away, and then you're limited to how long you can post, and maybe I won't do it. I think what I'll do is I'll just put the links in the Discord, and we can talk about it there. We don't have to talk about it on stream or in YouTube. So I would encourage you to think about Burke as a way of kind of framing, like, when you're talking about arguments and argumentation, what role does the model of people have in it? People's relationship to rhetoric, and is it possible to should we have, I mean, we have a lot of different models of argumentation here. Should we have one that is based on this idea of mistaken people? Kind of a weird thing. I could just sing it. Tell me why this is the land of confusion. No, Alan, you're right. I mean, I absolutely don't want to do it, but that's what I got from the tone of that is I have to fight it because the bots will just say, you can't post, you can't go live. You can't post videos over 5 minutes. You are limited to how much you can post per month and this kind of thing. So yeah, forget that. Screw it. Anyway, it's time to wrap up the stream. Final thoughts. We've been going for about 2 hours and 50 minutes now. I wanted to go for about 2. Estudiantes in the Discord. How are we doing? Quiet. They're just taking notes and listening carefully. I know it, right? Jariah, Kelly, Vix. They're all in there. Discode. The replay of this video should be up immediately. You go look at it. Take some more notes and take a look at it and see if there's anything you missed. Any final questions or anything we should end on? We didn't really cover that much. 2 hours isn't really long enough to... It's barely enough time to cover one reading. Let alone a bunch. But I kind of saw it more as an AMA, but maybe that's the wrong way to take it. But maybe tomorrow I'll just film... I'll just record some videos to put on YouTube of just kind of taking on some of these pieces. Which I think would be good. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for joining. Oh, thanks, Dutch Driver. I guess the last thing to do is say, should these be a regular thing? I felt unprepared and I felt a little lost. When I make a video, I have much more of a script. You're very welcome, Sophia. Sophia, do you prefer this or do you want the videos or do you want both? I mean, you're the student here. You're like, you know, I'm glad you're taking the class and like to do what you would want me to do. So I can make offline videos. I can make live stuff. I can do it all. We can do every Tuesday night, actually, if we want to. Do Argument Tonight can become a regular show. Why not? You are welcome, Van Gogh. And I appreciate sunflowers. So I think we might be even. Maybe. I don't know. Sunflowers might be a little bit better than this video. In terms of art. Just on the purely artistic level, sunflower might be better. But yeah, I appreciate the comment. That's good. Yeah, I think I'd like to maybe map it out a little bit better next time and have more of a plan. Maybe go for about an hour and then take an hour of just kind of conversation. Do maybe a 40-minute talk. Might be a better way of doing it. I don't know. Comments welcome. This video will be available. And Sophia likes both. Well, then you're going to get both. I think maybe we'll just do next Tuesday. But if that changes, we will post it in the Discord and on Canvas for those of you who are registered for the class. For the rest of you, like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell. And then, yeah, that might be a better way to proceed, Vincent. I think so. Lecturettes is the way to go. I really like that idea. I've been trying to keep it to about 15 minutes. But maybe I could do maybe I could do like a 5-part lecture on one essay. But I kind of want to keep the videos to about 15 minutes a piece at the max. I mean, 10 would be beautiful. I just can't do 10. You know, it takes me 10 minutes to kind of warm up, you know. I don't know if I can do 10-minute videos. I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. I think questions in the Discord are good. I don't want to give people a bunch of, like, busy work. But I think if people wanted to ask questions... I mean, the thing is, for students in this class, if you want a custom video on one question, I'll make one for you. It won't be hard. Not hard at all. Happy to do it. And then when we do the live stream, I can take on questions. There was something in the Discord I wanted to address. Maybe we can do this when we close. But what was it? I was like, oh, that would be good for the Discord to talk about. I think it was something Kelly was talking about. Kelly was giving a lot of her opinions about something. What was it? Let me look. Vix always has good things to say too. Baller. Oh, yeah. Kelly's talking about when people come into argumentation, like, I'm going to have my mind changed completely. Interesting perspective to come in with because, like, first of all, what a generous person. Like, most of the time people attend an argument, they don't want that to happen at all. They're attending because they're right and they want to hear somebody really screw up trying to change their mind. So most people don't come in with a generous attitude like, oh, I want my mind changed completely. And then they're kind of disappointed because argumentation doesn't work that way. I think that's right. But what an interesting place to start from. The idea that, like Kelly talked about in the Discord, that people would come in and say, I want a transformative experience. I want my mind changed. I kind of feel like in higher ed, that might be something that a lot of students are experiencing where you come in and you're like, wow, I want my mind blown away. And then the professor's like, I want 5 discussion board responses. There's a quiz every Friday. Stay off your phones. It's all about rules and discipline. And there's not this kind of mind-blowing, yeah, we got to prepare for the test. We got to work through the book. And there's not really that mind-blowing transformative moment. That might be where people are experiencing and they're kind of disappointed. And in argumentation, that might happen too, where you're like, I can see that happening. Let's say you're like a big supporter of climate justice. The idea that climate change is real and happening, and it's going to disproportionately affect the poor, the global poor, and disproportionately affect people who are non-white and who are in countries that don't have a lot of resources to help them. So climate justice. So we can't really do much about climate change. We should, of course, join the right kind of treaties and organizations and try to do our part. But what we really need to do is think about how we can make sure that these people aren't disproportionately affected by something that's going to impact us all. You go to a talk on that, and it actually makes it sound like not an important idea at all. Then you might be incredibly disappointed because you expect to have your world rocked on an issue that you already believe in, that you're already convinced by. Now, I can see that happening, and I think it happens quite a bit where you're like, oh, I know a lot about this topic, and you go hear a speaker, and you're like, ultimately disappointing because I didn't have my world rocked. I wasn't persuaded that my views were already good. I wasn't persuaded that I already had the right point of view. I think that happens probably more often than the opposite. That was something I wanted to talk about. Yeah, the aha moments are rare. Absolutely. Aha moments often happen a lot more for the arguer than the audience because they might go in there with a badass argument and they just get crickets. I bet that happens. I mean, that seems to happen a lot. And then the argument you didn't think much about, people want to talk about. Like something that was like a transitional phrase or even a figure like Chris Tyndale's talking about. People are like, wow, that was a powerful argument. They might have thought, well, it was a kind of a throwaway line. Spitting facts. Thank you, Vincent. Yeah, college might blow your mind. Yeah, a lot of people are like, yeah, I'm just going to college because I'm going for it. But, Alan, you do have to accept, I think, the idea that a lot of people would have an image of college that comes from popular culture, from film and television, right? There's going to be this experience where you're going to meet some amazing teacher and your mind's going to be blown and you're going to work really hard and you're going to meet your future partner, all these things. And, I mean, none of it may happen. Yeah, the transactional model of higher ed. Yep, Dutch driver is right. Instrumental model. Yeah, that's right. Like the idea that we're here to perform certain tasks on an arbitrary timetable. And that's what learning is, rather than some kind of like just open conversation. Well, speaking of which, I think I'm going to have to go now. It's getting kind of late here, and I think I'm ready to go to sleep. I had a very long day. I went to the doctor at 8 in the morning. And realized I'm an unhealthy dude. So lots of changes happened today that made me kind of grumpy. So we'll see how I can survive that. Lots of dietary changes. But I think it's going to be okay. Yeah, I mean, Alan's right. That's the attitude. That is one of the attitudes about college. All right, folks. Thanks for joining us for the stream. Really appreciated it. See most of you in the Discord with questions about this. I'm going to post this there, and I'll also post a link on Canvas for those of you in the class. Otherwise, for those of you on YouTube, thank you for joining. Like, comment, subscribe. Click that little bell, and you will be notified every time I go live, every time I post a new video on here. For now, I wish to bid you farewell from the Roman Senate here. I haven't used this image yet for the stream, so might be a good way to get out of here. Farewell. The Roman Synod is adjourned for now, and I will speak to you guys later. Farewell.